is Australia stop. We are on a 12-week tour with Startup Sesame, with the network of tech events and a community of tech event insiders. I'm Ben Costantini, thrilled to be here again this week, every Tuesday, 2 p.m. If you want to know more about the tour of events that we're running, go to tour.sesamers.com. We started in Paris, then we had a stop in Israel, Estonia, Africa, Russia, and Belarus was last week. Today is the 5th stop, and we're down south with Australia. This session is organized with our good friends of PostFest. We did their online event 2 months ago, and today they are bringing their community with a special panel that will give us an overview of what's happening, what's hot in Australia, why, how founders, investors, and other innovation companies engage with the local ecosystem, or why you should be engaging with the local ecosystem over there. The host of the session is the founder of PostFest and a good friend of the Sesamers community, George Hedden. That's all I wanted to say. I'll come back at the very end to say a few words about next week's session. George, this is your session. These are your panelists. Floor is yours.
Thank you so much, Ben. It's a pleasure to be part of this tour that you've done. You did a tremendous job entire year when the COVID hit, keeping entire community of event organizers in Europe, including myself from Australia, entertained with virtual coffees. And now this has turned into a tour around different ecosystems. So thank you so much for this opportunity. I'm very happy to bring speakers from very diverse backgrounds from 3 different cities here in Australia, Sydney, Brisbane, and Melbourne, to talk about what we have here, what's the ecosystem, who are the players, hubs, key startups, unicorns and soonicorns, and all that sort of stuff that I think you guys are going to be interested in. I'm just going to kick it off. And yeah, you can sort of come back at the end and tell everybody about what's next. Hi, everybody. So we have amazing panel here. There's 5 incredible speakers. It is 10 p.m. here in Australia. We're going to pretend it's middle of the day, like in Europe, with all of you. I'm going to introduce, first of all of the panelists, starting with Kate Erickson, Chief Program Officer at YBF Ventures and Director of the YBF Startup Immersion Program. Kate is a former PwC partner and head of disruption. She has spent over 20 years in leadership roles in Europe, Australia, Asia, and the United States, spanning growth, strategy, innovation, and customer experience, and building digital capability and ventures. Her experience incorporates working for and together with some of the world's largest brands. She co-founded Silicon Valley Innovation Center, AT&T Foundry in the US and Israel, and was a founding member of PwC Digital Leadership Team. She has deep technology experience, including 14 years with telecoms giant Ericsson, Mobile Ventures, building new business models and platforms used by companies like Twitter and Skype. And she has been active in banking, open banking, and fintech. Welcome, Kate.
Thank you.
Richard Kalm, Executive Program Director, SBC Australia, is the co-founder and Exec Program Director at Startup Bootcamp Australia, where he oversees numerous startups and corporate programs in fintech, food, energy, and sports. Richard started his professional career in the adrenaline sports industry, setting up his own business before working in the States for Watson Lemonades, the 2nd largest manufacturer of skateboards in the world at the time. He then moved into tech, investing in early stage e-commerce businesses before moving to London, setting up an innovation center in Shoreditch, managing an investment fund and running startup programs for 10 years. Since returning to Australia in 2014, he's been very active in startup scene as a director, founder, investor, and mentor with a portfolio of about 100 global startups. Welcome, Richard.
Hi, George. Good to be here.
Thank you. Kayleen Langford, Kayleen Langford is a passionate entrepreneur, coach, writer, and speaker, founder and owner of Startup Creative, a hugely popular online platform, podcast, and print magazine that educates, inspires, and supports creative entrepreneurs and future innovators. Kayleen works closely with individuals as a career coach, as well as with organizations as a business consultant and keynote speaker. In her almost non-existent spare time, she works her own talk with a busy yet balanced schedule of exercise, meditation, sunshine seeking, reading, research, and personal goal setting, as well as the occasionally sneaky Instagram scroll. Her first book, How to Start a Side Hustle, is forthcoming from Hardy Grant Books. Welcome, Kayleen.
Thank you. Thanks for having me.
Chad Renando. Chad is Startup Status CEO and Managing Director of Global Entrepreneurship Network Australia. Chad is mapping and measuring the impact of entrepreneurs across Australia at yours.startup.co, startupstatus.co. As part of this research, Chad helps governments, universities, corporations, innovation hubs, and entrepreneur programs measure the long-term impact of their innovation, investment, and helps regions connect entrepreneurial activity to community resilience. Chad is also a professional facilitator, speaker, coach, and researcher. He comes from a diverse background in fast growth manufacturing and digital firms, and is currently a research fellow in innovation ecosystems with the Rural Economy Center of Excellence at USQ, a research fellow with the Australian Centre for Entrepreneurship Research at QUT, director of the non-for-profit Startup Status, and managing director Australia with the Gen Network. Thank you, Chad. Welcome to tonight's session. And last but not least is Alan Jones, General Partner, Mate Ventures, entrepreneur in residence, investor, tech entrepreneur, and mentor. Alan has advised hundreds of Australian startups and invested in many of the best. Originally a content operations producer for Microsoft Sidewalk City Guide startup, Alan has Yahoo's first technical hire in Australia and went on to become product director for South Asia for Yahoo. He was then a co-founder and head of the content and product development for home entertainment tech startup Homescreen Entertainment, backed by the Packer family, CPH, acquired by QuickFlix. Alan was the founding investor in Pollenizer, StartMate, and Blackbird Ventures. His startup services agency, the news agency, built AAP, MediaNet, Autogenie, and Employment Hero before being acquired by Blue Chili in 2012. Alan's previous investments include Bugcrowd, Buzzy, Biteable, Cartly, LVO, GoSnap, a lot of companies, Propel Arrow, Top Me, I don't know, just a lot of stuff. Alan has advised founders and startup accelerators, Blue Chili, StartMate, Catalyzer, MoverD, and Collider, as well as advising clients of KPMG's Heights Growth Ventures teams as an entrepreneur in residence. Welcome, Alan. Amazing people we have, again, from all sorts of parts of the ecosystem. But the one person that has been focused on ecosystems for quite some time and make his life sort of dedication to it is Chad Renando. Chad, it would be really great for everybody that's now tuned in, whether they come from Australia as well and staying this late, or Europe and US. Can you please give us a little bit of an overview of, like, a top level, what's happening in Australia, so people can get a bit of an idea, just top level, and then we're going to sort of deep dive into different segments. I'll leave it to you.
Awesome. Excellent. Thank you very much, George. And thanks for the intro, just for myself and for everybody else. And as we know, with anything that you study, the more that you study, the more you realize what you don't know. So as I share, I look forward to the next 90 minutes after this of people kind of expanding on this and maybe even adding a few corrections in there. when you think about the Australian, what we refer to as the entrepreneur support system or the innovation ecosystem, it's important to go back for a few years, say around 2015. And a lot of things really kicked off around then with a big investment from government, a big signal to market, $1.1 billion, what we refer to as the ideas boom. And that really did kick off both at the state and national level, and a lot of local activity of just, innovation programs and accelerators and hubs. And we were opening up around 4 or 5 hubs or co-working spaces a month over the next 5 years, which is more than twice as many as we saw in total over the previous 5 years. So a lot of what you see now is just a rapid increase from that. It started leveling off around 2019, just before COVID, and then it really did steady around 2020. And most of that's primarily just to do to we've done our job. Like there was like an innovation hub in pretty much most every regional center, 3 to 10 in the major cities. So we've seen a rapid increase, and what we have is we've gone from all things to all people around 2015 to really starting to specialize by technology, by industry sector, and we have centers of excellence in most states and regions. So for example, up in Queensland, which is the only state of kind of scale that has like a 50-50 split between population, GRP, and number of business.
Looks like we lost you, Chad. Let's see if you come back, but maybe we might have to sort of jump in and cover for Chad. Is there anybody else that maybe wants to step in and say maybe Kate or Alan?
Where do we get up there? Did we get to the establishment of the ESV-CLP and the VCLP? So until Chad gets back, there was a federal government support program designed to encourage investment in early stage venture. Hey, Chad, I was just about to explain. So 2 schemes, ESV-CLP, Early Stage Venture Capital Limited Partnership, and VCLP. And ESV-CLP was support for fund managers who could raise 10 million up to 50 million, and then VCLP was for fund amounts larger than that. Those are Australian dollars. And the goal there was to give limited partners in those funds a tax-free return on any distributions from those funds. So that scheme was part of the reason for the early growth in tech venture capital in Australia. And so I was involved in an accelerator program here called StartMate. We had some early success with a few of our early cohorts from StartMate. And out of that track record, Nikki Shavak, one of the founders of StartMate, was able to spin up his first venture fund, which is called Blackbird Ventures, and it's now one of Australia's most successful, indeed perhaps one of the most successful worldwide in that 2010-2015 vintage. Would that be fair, Chad?
Yeah.
Cool. So Australian tech venture capital was mostly backed by people's credit cards. So Canva and Atlassian, 2 of Australia's biggest tech ventures, began as founder-backed, bootstrapped businesses and didn't raise venture until a little bit later on. In the case of Atlassian, and nearly, I think, 10 years later on. And it was the early success from some of those bootstrap startups out of Australia, combined with a sudden growth in venture capital that I think really kicked the ecosystem off.
Chad, would you like to continue with? Sorry, we kind of like got frozen.
No, that's yeah. My computer decided to restart right in the middle of it, as it does. Technology.
Yeah. Would you like to finish the
yeah?
Thought
Yeah. So just a real quick one, and Alan, it's good as far as also the like there was this kind of these parallel conversations happening around the different investments, and one of the things to acknowledge also is that there was a lot of activity happening kind of behind the scenes before a lot of the stuff became popular and visible as well. and to where we are now, I guess, just to quickly run through the states where we do have these centers around each one. Where you do have Queensland with a precinct and River City Labs and the AI hub picking up there, and even some kind of ag tech hubs happening up in Toowoomba and Bundaberg, some tourism happening up in Cairns. And so pretty much different focus areas across the region. A lot of fintech down in Sydney and the Sydney Startup Hub, and new plans there for the tower with Atlassian coming to play. Some things happening in the Australian Capital Territory, ACT with the Canberra Innovation Network. South Australia has Lot 14, where they have the Space Discovery Center down there, and they just onboarded Google down there. And then just down the road, down in South Australia, the Tonsley Innovation District, focusing on manufacturing and renewable energy. Up in Northern Territory is the Darwin Innovation Hub, with some hydrogen projects, clean energy innovation hubs, Energy Innovation Network, and the space tech collaboration with Singapore. We have the Van Diemen project down in Tasmania, Western Australia, Space Cube and Core, and a lot of the resource focus, obviously Victoria, YBF, as we have here in Melbourne Innovation Center. And so that's just a very broad overview, and there's so many that we missed. But pretty much if you want to do anything somewhere within Australia is going to be servicing that vertical. Not every state will be able to expand across and do everything holistically, but if you want to do something. So for example, while South Australia has a bit of a focus because of the Space Center down there, you do have space type technologies happening, some things happening in Queensland, some launch capability being developed up in Northern Territories, resources in Mackay as well as WA. So you've got a real diversity and a real spread that's happening. And if we think back to what we were back in 2019 as far as things leveling out, but then 2020, 2021, the KPMG report that came out just earlier this year showing about $2 billion worth of investment, our biggest year ever as far as that metric. So we really have kind of gone to a few strengths, even through COVID, a lot of stories as far as new firms adapting and be able to lean into some of the changes. So I think it's a really good position, but definitely keen to hear from the other panelists as far as what they're seeing, and particularly down to the local level.
Maybe it's not a bad place to start like that and just see how everybody else sort of sees it. Obviously, everyone's from accelerator to corporate to VC and angel to creative. We've got a very diverse audience. The panelists, and although a lot of innovation is mostly, I guess, attributed to how much cash there is to invest in the startups, there's a lot, as you said, Chad, infrastructures that are built in Australia now and being built and developed in different states, and they all sort of going at the same time. Is there anyone else that wanted to sort of jump in? I also wanted to just maybe outline, I know Alan has mentioned Atlassian and Canva as the Australia's first sort of unicorns, but since then we've got Airwallex, Safety Culture, and just very recently Zip Money, Zoox, Afterpay, Campaign Monitor. If I'm not getting it right, let me know. I'm not sure if Culture Amp is a unicorn, but these are kind of soon to be unicorns. Airtasker, Athena, Sandal, Moola, Deputy. These are some of the companies that maybe some of you overseas might have heard of, and actually maybe even using it. I just wanted to kind of throw that out there. And please, anyone else that wants to sort of jump in and talk from your perspective, perhaps maybe Kate, you want to sort of give a little bit of overview. What's that like from, you've done a lot of things, you've been in corporate, now you're back in sort of startup, you have your own startup. You can tell us a little about that, and you can tell us how do you seeing it from your sort of perspective, your lens.
Thanks, George. Look, Australia is a very exciting startup scene. YBF Ventures, just for the people who don't know, and so you can understand that perspective, are one of Australia's largest innovation and tech hubs. So we work with startups and scale-ups, we work with corporate innovation, and then we work with talent looking to shift into that entrepreneurial environment. So we're based, got multiple sites in Victoria and Melbourne and in Sydney and in the process of expanding that. So I think that I love the discussion for two reasons. One of them is that all of the important things to all of us listening are coming through in the startup ecosystems. They are diversity, they are inclusion, they're health and aged care, and sustainability, looking for new ways to do things, and all underpinned by collaboration. We're looking at female founders and Indigenous owners. And so all of the good things are happening here and hopefully in other markets. And as we know, necessity is the mother of all invention. So we certainly know there's a lot of things to put our minds on in the world at the moment. So it's great to see the Australian startup ecosystem working there. The next thing I wanted to do, just bring together some of Chad and Alan's comments and some of yours, George, and that is any ecosystem is obviously kind of like a carousel. And in that, we've got startups and they're trying to prove new things. We've got a number of scale-ups and unicorns that you've mentioned, George, the ones that are trying to, they're well-funded and growing globally to provide a service globally, like the Afterpays, the Canvas, the Atlassians. And obviously, we're really proud of those. Then we've got the corporate side of things as well. And corporate's a big part of that carousel that turns, because the carousel doesn't turn if there's one heavy part of it. And I think that a lot of corporates in Australia recognise that 90% of what happens to them and in their industry is going to come from without outside. So there's a really strong and positive set of engagement from corporates in multiple ways. And I'll hold off on that for the moment because you might want to jump in there a little bit later and the other panelists might want to chat. But basically it's startups, scale-ups, corporate, and then you've got the universities looking to collaborate more with venture funds and research and patents. And you've got the venture funds. And in Australia, crowdsourced funding, or CSF, has been doing very well. Virtual is the largest. I think they did around 80% of the funding. And females were significantly more likely to be funded in there. So that's another good indication there.
Just to jump in, they just announced $50 million sort of they funded in the last, since 2018, so which is pretty amazing.
Yeah, it is remarkable. So I think they've raised 120 successful offers, for example, and as I say, some of the largest are kind of female funded. The average investment size was about 1.3 million, I think. So on the early stage, but really great grassroots startups coming through there. So it's sort of startups, scale-ups, corporates, universities, venture funds, and then talent underpins all of that. And we're seeing a really interesting shift in probably around the rest of the world too, but Australians wanting to do more purposeful and meaningful work and be part of building and growing. So there's a very exciting shift and a program that we've been running to take corporate talent and kind of just really deep dive them into the startup ecosystem, hoping for a triple win there, which is that corporate talent can be used to grow scale-ups, or corporate talent goes back into corporate but in growth and CVC, corporate venture capital roles, or corporate talent says, you know what, I've got an idea I can't unsee, I'm going to start it. So that's been a really rewarding experience. So just really an umbrella around what's being discussed and how there's a really strong circulation of those at the moment. And then, of course, you get the unicorns investing Afterpay, having a ventures arm, investing back in. So it really is a carousel turning there. And I'll stop for the moment and look forward to deep diving into corporate innovation when you tell me to, corporate startup innovation when you tell me to.
Yeah, fantastic. That was really great overview. Maybe we could go to Richard and Caitlin as well, just to kind of hear a little bit from them. Richard, would you mind sort of jumping in terms of accelerators? You've been very prominent. You've done a great job. You're focusing on a very few verticals, and it's been a few years. You have quite a lot of successful companies going out to market from SB Australia. Do you mind just maybe even beyond SB Australia, kind of giving a bit of an overview what's happening in Australia in accelerator sort of space?
Sure, George. Yeah, I mean, like Chad and Alan said, probably 4 or 5 years ago, before some of the government monies was flowing in, it was pretty bare. I remember working in London and sort of coming back to Australia on a couple of occasions, and really being quite disappointed about the prospect of returning home, because there wasn't much happening. There wasn't money flowing. There weren't programs being established and things like that. So actually, when I decided to come back, I wanted to make a bit of a difference. It was part of the reasons why why I wanted to get involved. And it was just fortuitous that there was a bit of government money sort of flowing into the ecosystem at the time. And that's been, like a tremendous help. There's now, like as was mentioned before, sort of programs in a number of the cities, government funding, like at state and federal level, also attracted a lot of international players, like including, organizations like Techstars and Startup Bootcamp that have come into the market now, which has meant that there's a lot more. There's not just programs now, Australian programs for Australian startups, but there's global programs for global startups as well, and we're like attracting talent into the country as well, which has made a big difference to the local ecosystem. I think one of the other things that we're seeing is a lot of people that have got overseas experience that have worked in either the States or in Europe starting to come back. COVID's probably accelerated that a little bit as people sort of saw that Australia wasn't as badly affected, and so there's a lot more people from overseas that have had that experience, that have got the skills, knowledge, have done stuff before, that are coming back and starting up businesses as well. And you're seeing, particularly in remote areas, like people are coming back for the lifestyle choice. So companies like Biteable down in Tasmania, pretty remote area, not known as a big startup hub, like they're able to successfully raise capital both locally and overseas, go through Series A sort of funding rounds, and live in a pretty remote area of Australia for lifestyle choices. And that's really encouraging to see the development of the startup ecosystem like that.
Fantastic. Thanks for that overview. Kayleen, what could you maybe from your perspective add to this, knowing you're coming from and have built amazing place for entrepreneurs and startups through Startup Creative. You're dealing with startups every day. What have you seen? What have you seen from startups that you deal from day to day? And maybe if you can just share some of the resources that are available that we have not maybe mentioned.
Yeah, great. Absolutely. I think with Startup Creative, I started about 6 years ago, and was from my own drive to leave the corporate world and chase the startup dream and, create that new reality. My background was youth work, actually. So started to really see the trend of the next generation wanting to not only execute on their own ideas without the red tape of organizations, but create a lifestyle, which is, COVID was massively with people being like, all right, how am I going to do life differently and build something and chase the dream? Not that startups and entrepreneurs that easy. But I worked very closely in that very early stage startup space. So my book has just come out on how to start a side hustle. So very introducing the idea of, the possibilities of being an entrepreneur and bringing teams together on programs, university and state funded. A lot of Sunshine Coast Council in Queensland have a creative incubator, very early stage for creative entrepreneurs that is in its third year and been part of that program development. We've got State Library here in Melbourne who have just opened Start Space, which was a result of a launch VIC study that showed that 98% of the business income here in Melbourne was from small businesses. So that is about bringing them into the space and helping them to activate and innovate and see what's kind of out there that we can play with. I've also done Melbourne University have got a program out of their Deakin University, AcmeX, which was out of the Foundry program, another very early stage creative scene. But then we've also got General Assembly, who are a massive player in educating and starting to really skill people up with with the skills that they need or might need for whether that's coding or development and things like that. So yeah, I work in that. A lot of funding. Even Gold Coast City Council have been doing some stuff for a number of years, and even just into high schools are starting to really educate entrepreneurship for our next generation and planting the seed early and activating programs and support around that as well. So mostly where I play, as well as one-on-one coaching and people playing in the small business space, with a small percentage of those people going on to grow businesses. Things like, you know, engaging with Afterpay and Good On You app was another really good one that's kind of come out. Seeing a lot of people interested in like the social aspect of business as well. So a lot of like brands for good are coming out of it with the fashion space, as well as the creative entertainment spaces as well. And then people who through COVID definitely saw a lot of people who took their small business into more an online scale space, and have got results out of that. And I think the biggest thing that I saw last year was that need to survive and people being like, okay, I'm going to see how I can use tech and innovate here to mostly survive, but then also give it a crack because they could work from home.
Thanks, Kayleen. There's a couple of sort of threads here that I was thinking to go. There's, in conversation with Chad the other day, there's something that's sort of really stuck on with me. I think he said that there's quite a large number of people that are entrepreneurs in our companies. They kind of innovate a lot more, but it's not the same. Well, they wouldn't sort of start a startup because they get paid well here. It's one of the things that Australia is good for, and they feel very cushy and they love sort of innovating within the companies. So I wanted to throw it back to Chad again, and in the last 5 years, how has the ecosystem changed? I mean, there's significant sort of speed that it's all sort of developing in the last few years. But let's go back 5 years, and where do you see that sort of kind of going in your sort of view?
I think thanks for that, George. And I think Australia is really interesting in terms of like a case study on a growing ecosystem, right? Because it was almost like, as Richard mentioned, it seemed like, well, what's happening? And people are scratching around, where are the programs, where are the spaces, and then boom, like there was just a lot of activity. And when you have a lot of activity, sometimes you have waste, sometimes you have things, you know, should we have done that? A few things that failed or we learned from. And a lot of that, as I mentioned before, was kind of all things to all people. And but what we are seeing now, and I pick up again on something that Kate mentioned, is this focus on more specialty areas. I did mention things like technology, like you have an artificial intelligence hub up in Queensland. You've got certain groups, and we have blockchain groups, and we have a national fintech, peak body. So we're developing those. But we're also seeing focus on, say, female entrepreneurs, on Indigenous entrepreneurs. We're seeing foundations come to play, which is a bit of a vehicle for corporates to get involved as well. So the Minderoo Foundation over in Western Australia is supporting an Indigenous program to train up angel investors, which is fairly unique globally in that there's a lot of work quite often done to support Indigenous entrepreneurs, but this actually provides representation among the investment cohort to get them around the table at that level. So we really are seeing this diversification. We're seeing broader representation. But I will take the point that you mentioned and be interested in Kate's comments as well from the corporate, as well as hear from Alan as far as how that relates to some of the investment side. Is Australia does rank #1 according to the Global Entrepreneurship Monitor, which is a representation of 50 different economies across the world around entrepreneurship. We're very good at doing entrepreneurship inside a business. We also have a relatively high fear of failure, number 13 around that same ranking, which is, you think, surprising because we're the lucky country. We went over 2 decades without having a down year pre-COVID. But I think that actually contributes to things being fairly easy. And so if we're going to do something, we're probably going to do it in the safety of a corporation. But we're also the country that wants to give it a go. So we want to kind of to have a shot at things. So I think it's not necessarily fighting that culture, but it's working within it. And then how do we tap into that latent opportunity? How do we tap into the potential? We have really good institutions, really good universities, fantastic education system. How do we unlock that potential for research commercialization, for technology transfer? We are starting to see it. I think COVID, to be frank, I know a lot of people were impacted, tourism significantly. But by the same token, maybe it was what we needed to be able to unlock a few things and to change some mindsets. And maybe that's a bit of a threat. I also wouldn't mind hearing from people as far as, was this actually potentially a bit of a shifting point to get some more of that attraction of talent or attraction of opportunity to use the talent that we do have within Australia? But definitely keen to hear from others as far as where you see things going.
Kate, would you want to jump, since we were talking about the corporate again, and extend to what Chad was saying? I wouldn't mind also maybe if it's of interest for everybody to talk about how was the impact of pandemic last year and how, if that changed anything. So feel free to kind of reference that. We're still living through it, and luckily for everybody else in Europe and US, when I say I've been to the in real life sort of event here, or even gone to get a coffee, it's very strange still. So for us, it's very normal here. So anyway, if you want to reference that a little bit as well, feel free to do so.
Thank you, George. I can jump in and build on your comments there, Chad. Such an interesting time. First of all, with regard to the pandemic, I think the last years we've seen obviously significant and increasing change in industries. And last year we saw it overnight, and we still are. You know, education changed, payments changed, everything changed, retail changed, healthcare changed. And one of the, obviously very difficult and now pressing things for us to do is to, the change is too big to go back to incremental change in some ways. And the pressure comes from outside all of us. Basically, if you run an organization, it's coming from outside. So I think one good thing there is that some of the risk averseness will be unlocked, I believe. And the second thing I think we'll see a lot more of is collaboration, because all of the issues about, diversity, mental health, the cost of healthcare, nobody can solve these by themselves. So here we all are sitting on the floor with our boxes of stuff. You've just got to go and walk into the middle and tip it out and say, how can I help? And I think the opportunity is great. The reward is great. The investment is less. The impact is going to be much better when we all chip in and solve these things. So I think entrepreneurship wise, and the impact of COVID and the need for the corporate ecosystem to work more with the startup ecosystem, I think we're all dressed and ready to do more of what we probably already know needed to be done. So when we think of entrepreneurship, it's still a challenge, because if you're sitting at the steering wheel as a leadership team, you sort of go, well, look, I've got cost issues and revenue issues and digitization issues, and now someone's put their hand up with a good idea. Understandably, there's not the same resources to deal with that. But let me just share with you a little bit what we are seeing in corporate startup engagement and why it is an exciting and positive time. So corporates, I guess everyone has a story, and if you're a corporate, you wake up and you say, well, the first thing I better do is get my team up to speed with what's happening in the outside world, behaviors, investments, startups, emerging competitors, etc., technologies. And the second thing you do is say, well, let me scan and see what I should be looking at. And you can either use that internally when you see it, or you can step out into the market and engage. And so we see executive teams sort of upskilling, which is just a basic precursor. It doesn't change a lot, but it's just a basic tool to have. And then you step out and you say, well, look, let me look up in the sky and see sort of what's happening. And that is a lot of people we're working with, a lot of clients we're working with are doing that, coming and saying, well, can you scan what's happening, what's going on? And I'll cover those subjects in a second. But after you've looked, then you say, okay, I've got to engage. And when you engage, you're either going to procure a startup or have some kind of showcase, incubation, hackathon with them, or you set up a tech hub. And YBF run them with ag tech, with Treasury Estate wines to engage with startups, with law tech, and some of those have just got their first $1 million in funding just yesterday, actually, from the external market, working with Lander and Rogers. You see prop tech, which we've had for some time, and most recently with Honeywell. So that's where you sort of say, I need a better way and a different set of rules and places to engage with startups there as well. And the next thing is, if you can't just look at it or procure it or co-create with it, the next thing you better do is put some cash down as a corporate venture capital fund. And then we're seeing a lot of that go on too, and a fair amount of success there. So all the big players, you've got, Westpac with Westpac Ventures and Reed Ventures, you've got Telstra Ventures, NAB Ventures, a whole set of venture companies like that, which are having a big impact on the market as well. They're investing in some of our scale-ups and unicorns. Even if you look at Athena recently, invested in by super funds and banks. If you look at Slip, for example, invested in by all the banks, Medipass. So it's quite a good situation. Be upskilled. See what's out there, have a mechanism to engage a little bit, like a hackathon or a showcase or a big bit, or invest in them. And the icing kind of on the cake, I think that's really exciting, and back to Chad's comment about entrepreneurship, is that we have seen since about August last year an abundance of corporate professionals looking to mentor startups and scale-ups, advise them, volunteer to help with different things, because they find it invigorating and meaningful work to do. And also we ran a program with the Victorian government, just as an indication of what I think we'll see more of, to take, 500,000 people lost their jobs in COVID last year. We just ran a program to take around 25 of them and put them through a program to immerse them with founders of startups. And 80% of them, within 2 weeks of finishing, have been employed in growth roles or scale-ups, which we're really excited about too.
Fantastic. That's a great overview. Quite interesting for me, actually, to learn from your perspective, where you operate and how corporates behave. And since we are on a topic of venture capital and investment, Alan, could you please give us a little bit of overview, because you actually haven't had a chance. I guess people would want to know, apart from StartMate and Blackbird, who are the other venture capital firms? What's going on in a land of VC in Australia?
It's always good to listen to other people's perspective. So it's been interesting to listen. Thank you all, everybody. I do think one of the challenges with the Australian economy is that it tends to be an economy that tends towards monopolies and oligopolies. And so particularly when we're talking about corporates' role in innovation and in venture capital, we don't have sufficient diversity of large corporate brands in our various industries to really foster a lot of innovation. I think a lot of the engagement that corporate Australia has in our startup industry is about control and keeping a cover on things, making sure that things don't get out of hand. We haven't seen in Australia the disruption of a major Australian brand by the startup industry. We haven't had a bank fail. We haven't had a telecommunications company fail. We have had an airline fail, but it took a pandemic to do that. So in most other major economies, we've seen startup destroy an industry sector and rebuild it from scratch. That hasn't quite happened in Australia yet, and that's largely because in pretty much every industry there's one dominant player and one close second place competitor, and then a distant tier of third tier of companies below them. I think one thing that Australia could benefit from would be being more engaged with a global economy, so that really our big Australian brands are more subject to disruption from overseas competition. That said, there is a constant growth, and so when I look back at the 25 years or so that I've been in the Australian tech startup industry, I've literally seen it grow from a room full of people, including that included the entire Australian tech startup industry, to the South Start conference in Adelaide last week, PauseFest last year, where it takes some of the biggest venues in Australia to contain maybe the 50% of our industry that attends these amazing events. So growth has been fantastic, but I think we sometimes do get a bit caught up in our lack of perspective for what's going on in the rest of the world, because when we get excited by 10x growth, a multiple of 10 growth over say 5 years or 10 years in any aspect of the Australian tech startup ecosystem, we sometimes forget that in that same period of time, other markets might have seen a 25 or 50 times multiple growth in that particular metric. So while it feels like to us all the time we're growing fast, I do feel like we're being outcompeted, we're being outgrown even more than in the past by some of the major global economies. And I'm thinking here of Indonesia, of South Korea, of Taiwan, of Brazil. These are markets used to be about the same size as ours, and in terms of the number of players in investment, in terms of the number of new startups starting every year, and we're growing, but they're shooting way ahead of us. I think where we excel is that our universities have evolved into a focus on private international fee-paying students. So the vast majority of the future growth of their revenue is going to come from international students studying in Australia. And when we get our visa system right, that allows us to benefit from those young people coming here, studying, getting great education from a quality Australian university, and they're deciding then that the lifestyle and the career opportunities are here for them to remain if Australia allows them. So that's been a big part of the growth engine for Australia in the past few years, and that's where a lot of Australia's fast-growing startups first turn to for technical talent. We're starting to see the very early stages of successful Australian startups seeding new startups. So original founding teams, people leaving those original founding teams when the company's 150 to 100 people plus, and then going out and pursuing their own individual ventures, sometimes with their own capital that they've been able to acquire through having a successful secondary event as an early employee. But still, I would say for the most part, most Australian tech startups at the very early stages suffer from a very big constraint on experienced talent. So that experienced talent extends across almost the full spectrum of any kind of tech startup. So there are relatively few people working in relatively well compensated jobs in the Australian finance industry prepared to take a risk and join a tech startup, for instance. And so our startups should maybe persist with the outsiders, the loners, the misfits, those who can't find a home in a comfortable job in a large Australian bank. But we should be able to see at some point in the future, we should start to see those experienced, successful finance industry executives, for instance, leave their comfortable jobs in large Australian banks and go and work for, hopefully, the fintech startups that are going to disrupt our banks. We don't yet see that, but I hope it can come. I think the biggest change as a result of the pandemic in the Australian tech startup ecosystem for me has been a removal finally once and for all of the disadvantage we face in being in such a different time zone and being 8 hours, 14 hours, 20 hours away from the other major markets in the world. It's almost like the rest of the world has kind of been brought down to our Zoom call level. You know, we've been trying to minimize our international travel because it's so expensive for us for such a long time. And we've been trying to get as much done, build as much relationship with the rest of the world over things like Zoom. And now all the startups in the rest of the world are kind of brought back down to our position. And maybe if we're lucky, perhaps we have an advantage in that, given that we've been doing it, you know, perhaps longer and more intensively than anybody else. A big advantage I think we have in you know, Australia is now a nation that where we're all able to individually discuss the individual cases of COVID infection that occasionally arise in Australia. So we are able to mingle so freely and with so few precautions. It gives us an advantage in our potential ability to face-to-face collaborate with each other. And so I think I see bright opportunities ahead for us when we do that. The only thing with that approach, though, is that it takes a relatively small startup ecosystem and then subdivides it further into cities, because our cities are so very far apart with so very little in between them. You know, it's a 10, 12-hour drive in between Australia's capital cities, or you know, a relatively expensive flight right now. So I would hate Australia to decide, okay, seeing as we can be face to face, let's all be very face to face. I'd love to see us continue to practice our Zoom call skills and become a nation that builds startups out of teams of people that aren't based in the same location. And that way we can deploy our great intellectual capacity that we might find in Australia's regional centres, not just its capital cities.
Great. There was a bit of a phrase coined at this last Pause Fest online: tech ecosystems moving into the cloud, basically, and leveling up sort of the field of access. And what does that mean for VCs? And will VCs then invest in different ecosystems and different startups if they're not 4 hours away on a plane flight? They could be over Zoom. Will the VCs sort of invest in startups over Zoom and that kind of stuff? Have you seen anything like that happening in Australia? Or do you think?
Yeah, we definitely. Sorry. Yeah, we've definitely seen in the past 6-9 months more interest from overseas investors in Australian startups, and doing relatively more of their initial due diligence over Zoom calls. And I expect that to continue. That'll be good for the Australian ecosystem, because it'll mean that you know, relatively complacent, relatively slow moving, relatively cautious Australian tech venture capital might move a little faster, might learn to be a little bit more efficient, might learn to be a little bit more bold with more competition from overseas. I think that would be great for our whole ecosystem. There is a counterbalancing effect, though. So Australia's 2010 to 2015 venture capital vintage, those fund managers have now done so well over the past 10 years that they've been rewarded by Australia's enormous superannuation industry with a huge influx of capital. So we've seen fund managers go from 20 to 30 million under management to $1 billion under management in less than 10 years. And unfortunately, the way that makes the best sense for them to continue to scale up their deal flow and to find bigger and better deals is to broaden their focus to international markets. So where, for instance, in the past we might have been able to count on, you know, the majority of the capital from Australia's best VC funds being dedicated to Australian startups because they simply couldn't look at very much deal flow overseas. Now it's like they have so much capital under management, they have to be, you know, spending a third to a half of their time looking for deal flow overseas. So again, it's kind of like we've got this huge opportunity, and some of it's already being taken away from us. So there's always going to be a balance there.
Fantastic, Richard. What are your thoughts about and how have you managed to? Has this level playing field kind of been good for your cohorts? And I know that we had a conversation, and obviously you had to, like everybody else, not just do the Zoom meetings, but roll out the entire thing in video format and engage people. Maybe perhaps you could sort of reflect on that, but I wanted to really ask you if you can give us a few examples of your sort of most successful sort of startups you had.
Yeah, thanks, George. Yes, so a couple of things, like listening to Alan then speak about the tyranny of distance. Without doubt, that's been a bit of a godsend. Like we're living in pretty much a fairly free society. Like turning up to football games with 70,000 and 80,000 people more because of luck than anything else. Because we are an island and we're a long way away from a lot of other people, so we've been quite fortuitous in that respect. But the benefits for us have been, like Alan just pointed out there. People wouldn't dream of taking Zoom calls. You had to hop on a plane and to get the meetings with senior people. People wouldn't think of investing in early stage businesses without actually, like rubbing skin and shaking hands and actually meeting people. Like a lot of those traditional social norms have certainly been blown away. So large corporates are willing to do pilots with companies that they've never met before from overseas. We've demonstrated that. Executives from those companies are happy to jump on a Zoom call after hours. That would never have happened pre-COVID. So all of the things like that have been broken down because of this have probably had a greater advantage to us because we're just so far away than it has for other countries. I mean, if you're sitting in France and you want to speak to someone in Austria, traditionally that's just been a couple of hours in the car. For us, the similar equivalent to that is like hopping on almost like a 24-hour flight. So those barriers of having been broken down have been great for us. We do a lot of work for a number of corporates overseas. For us, winning some of those contracts in the last 12 months has been a lot easier, and people have been a lot more receptive. They don't really care as much where you are in the world as long as you're delivering good content and delivering good outcomes. And for us, that's been a huge advantage around that. And so a lot of our startups are also benefiting from that because we're running programs at the moment with startups in Germany, in the US, in other countries in Europe, and they've gone through, since the start of this year, they've gone through a pilot program with one of Australia's sort of top energy companies, Energy Australia, and they're signing contracts, they're signing deals, they're working through pilots, and none of these people have even stepped foot in the country. And all that's, I don't think that would have been possible sort of pre-COVID. The expectation is that those teams would fly out to Australia, would spend time here, would get to know people before like any of that was possible. So that's certainly a big advantage for us, and it's great because it's not just providing opportunities. I mean, competition's good. It's not just providing opportunities for Australia, and some of those opportunities are going to go overseas, but more and more, if there's more hedge funds, if there's more VC funds here in Australia, deploying money both in Australia and overseas. Similarly, if there's more technologies coming in, those open markets mean that more Australians with good ideas are going to benefit as a result of that. So yeah, I think it's a good thing.
Fantastic. And would you mind sharing maybe some of the success stories that you had, perhaps startups going off and getting investments further, or working and being acquired by one of the partners that you have? Anything that you particularly wouldn't mind sharing?
Yeah, so some of the ones that have been through our programs in the last couple of years. So, I mean, We Power came from Europe out to Australia. They're working on PPAs. So basically, they're creating a marketplace connecting companies directly with green energy producers. So they're funding new green energy programs and creating a marketplace where you can trade those PPAs into the market and basically enabling more more green production, but also more users to actually purchase those. And effectively buy energy at below market rates with full transparency across that. So they're a great example. They they raised $40 million when the initial sort of ICO boom took place a little while ago. But they've got a business model that's sustained through that, and then they're now got a trading marketplace both here in Australia and also in Europe. So they're a great example of a company that's come overseas with some great technology and being able to implement that into Australia. I think the energy industry in Australia, the lack of policy, high prices, the shock that we've had in Australia has been terrible for like a lot of consumers of energy, but it's also created a hell of a lot of opportunities for energy companies, and we've certainly seen a lot of overseas disruptors coming into the Australian marketplace simply because of the fact that utilities here are moving a hell of a lot faster than utilities in Europe or in the US, and that creates opportunities for startups to work with them. So that's an example of a company that's come here. Some of the local companies that we've worked with that have done really well. Bindi Maps, a company out of Sydney that's started off with visually like a tracking or a mapping solution, a digital mapping solution for people with visual impairment. Basically wayfinding within shopping centres and things like that. They joined our sports program because they also wanted to extend out into like a new industry beyond shopping centres and hospitals, and they had great success. They fitted out the Melbourne Aquatic Sports Centre and now are talking to the MCC and a number of other sporting venues around the country to roll out their products. They've been funded locally through Artesian, so a really great news story for a local company. Another one's Red Grid. We spoke about Virtual before, the crowdfunding platform. So Red Grid came to us literally off of the back of a Melbourne University hackathon competition. So great team, pretty much at the idea stage, looking to build like intelligent grid, so effectively like the Internet of Energy. So the concept of if everything that consumes energy within your house is connected and can be centrally controlled, like there's a hell of a lot of power and intelligence. You can do things like turn down your air conditioning when you've got peak prices by 10 or 20%. You don't really notice the difference in the room, but it makes a massive difference to grid stability and also price and things like that. So they, off the back of our program, they successfully raised just under $1 million through crowdfunding and through really inspiring the market through the message that they were sending out. And they've now signed deals with Mirvank and Mirabella, running pilots and working with Monash University to really roll out this technology. So they're another great success story that's come out of our energy program.
Amazing. There's a few of them that I personally know, and they are great businesses. Kayleen, I just wanted to also ask you similarly, this leveling the ground of what COVID did to everybody. How's that sort of helped you, hopefully, as well, connecting with the startups and the community and executing potentially faster and in different sort of locations than you would otherwise? And how was that for the startups or businesses that you deal with?
Yeah, I think just talking to some of those points around connection and accessibility, and I think the rise of like Clubhouse and people being online with social media, podcasting, webinars, online learning was just through the roof. And I think whether you were working from home or you'd lost your job or whatever was happening, you saving time from not, like, I know I personally save so much time from going to meetings now. And I think that like allows us to kind of feed that space of people actually questioning and breaking the norms and the trends of the traditional education system that we have always had, which is, going into the corporate world or a traditional job. So people are actually, the break in the system is like lent back and are questioning and saying, what else is there? And what else could I do? And now I've got a bit more space to be able to think about that idea or that innovation that has been swirling around. And Clubhouse has been an incredible app. That came up, not in the heart of COVID, but more recently that I don't know if anyone else here has used it, but is incredibly accessible. I have had clients who have, had got people like Gary Vee in conversations and are getting them over into festivals and online workshops that they're running out of here in Australia, because people were just accessible and online. Even my own personal Instagram grew thousands and was just getting hundreds of thousands of people in workshops on Zoom almost every week, looking for startup support and that real early stage ideas of actually getting something off the ground. So I think it gave us access to really great ways to learn and keep upskilling, and I think that's flowing on to where it is now. And just as you were talking there, Richard, a few people that I've worked with actually have a lot of Aussies who are stuck overseas have started reaching out for coaching and looking for ways to get back, activate back here and get their startup support off the ground. So yeah, I think it's been great.
Thanks. Anything that anyone, this is for anybody now, whoever puts their hand first, they can go. Anything that,
sorry.
Oh, you can just go. I don't need to have
Right. Is there anyone? And I just wanted to build on something that Alan and Richard just said, actually, a couple of things. One of them, I guess, was the fact that our major corporates here don't innovate so much, which I absolutely agree with, and very few of them have international aspirations. We do have some disruption from external companies coming in. Obviously, Apple, for example, is going to disrupt a lot about the revenues in the telecoms streams from Telstra and Optus here. So there is that. Then you see the banks like Michael Starkey from Athena, which just broke some records. He's one of the major banks sort of going across into startups. So you do get that kind of push from multinationals coming into Australia and then corporates jumping and then our startups starting to go out overseas. But one interesting thing too is, Israel has, I think, around 300,000 engineers working for around 300 or more multinationals. And Australia does have a little bit of that. So even at YBF, for example, we've had Thought Machine, which is UK tech fintech platform, coming in to work out of YBF and set up their APAC growth here. We've had Lucid Chart, which is a US unicorn, working also with us locally and expanding out to APAC across. Reich, for example, has been based with us, obviously bought by Citrix for 2.25 billion or something earlier this year, at the end of last year. So we do get a little bit of that now, multinationals coming in, not just to disrupt, but to work with Australian talent and set up and grow out to the region, because it is a good place to be. So that's another kind of good mix for the Australian ecosystem, I think.
Yeah, anyone else wants to jump in?
Yeah, I might just build a bit on what Kate was saying there. And Alan, again, appreciated some of your comments, particularly around kind of the whole out-competing, outgrown kind of notion within Australia. I was having a conversation with Peter Adamick, who runs the Canberra Innovation Network, the other day, around some of the nature, exactly this conversation. And he's like, Chad, he's from overseas, and he says, immigration, like getting that fresh blood in, fresh ideas in. Australia, it's an absolutely amazing country. Like, why wouldn't you want to live here? Like, it's just, there's so much diversity, so many things to do, but it is a bit of a closed system. Like, we think quite often you talk to people, and we are seeing more companies being, as we say, born global, but there can be a sense that we've got all this landmass, we have this big, it looks big. So we think, well, once I prove it in Australia, then I'll go global, as compared to maybe some other smaller countries or Israel, where they say, look, we got to go global from day one. And so how do we get them hungrier? How do we get some of those new ideas coming in, a bit of freshness? And I'm reminded of kind of this concept of resilience, where, one concept of resilience is where we can go back to the way it was. And of course, where there is no returning, there is no going back upwards. We can also talk about going from one state until we get to a new state of what we call equilibrium. We get to the new normal, but it's probably not going to settle back down to a new normal. It's always going to be changing. So how do we get Australia in that situation where we're constantly adapting, constantly have the capability to shift? And I think it is getting some of that fresh blood in. It's getting some of the new corporates in. It's getting some of that disruption that Alan was talking about, either through competition, through new talent coming in, bringing in new ideas. We've got a lot of good capability here, but I think that can be augmented by new ideas coming in. But as far as how we do that, I think also one of the other points I'll pick up, though, we do have certain systemic aspects about the nation. We are, I think, the fourth least diverse, not diverse, but least dense nation in the world. Like, we are just distributed across a large landmass, as was being mentioned. And I think we need to find ways to replace the things we take for granted on our physical systems, that natural connectivity we might get, with social systems and digital systems. I think COVID has been a bit of an equalizer, which I think we can leverage now, getting new corporations in. Kate, as you mentioned, some people are coming in and setting up their side office here. And we are seeing, as Alan was mentioning, a bit of that renewal, that regeneration, the recycled investors, recycled entrepreneurs coming back, shifting gears and reinvesting. And I'd be interested in hearing other people's takes on as far as what's next for Australia. What does the next 5 years hold, and how do we get some of those that renewal and maybe expedite this progression that we're already seeing?
That's interesting question, Chad, for sure. It's been quite I guess maybe delayed sort of response in Australia with startups, and now when it's on, it's just kind of really got really on. Where do you guys see maybe that next five years might go to, or are for Australia? Alan, do you have some thoughts?
I do. So there's a revolution happening right now in orbit, where the way I like to describe it is we are putting space in the cloud. So in the same way, when I first started in startups, if you wanted to host a SaaS platform, you had to actually own and operate your own hard drives, your own servers, and they would sit in a co-location rack somewhere in an ISP. These days, of course, when you're building a startup, all of your code, all of your servers are all hosted in the cloud by AWS or IBM or Microsoft or Rackspace or someone. At the moment, up until this point in the evolution of the space industry, similarly, if you wanted to have a satellite in space to do science or conduct business, you had to first form a national space authority, right, and fund it sufficiently so that you could spend tens of millions of dollars on building a satellite and getting it up into orbit. What's starting to happen now, what's taking place right now, is that new fleet operators are launching much lower cost satellites and whole fleets of them rather than large big ones into orbit. And not all of those fleets of satellites will be 100% utilized all of the time. And what we're starting to see is that some of the excess capacity of those satellites will be broken out to anybody who needs to get stuff done in space, right? So there are microgravity chemistry and engineering experiments that can be done, and manufacturing techniques that can be tested. There's obviously a lot of economic benefit in getting more frequent, more up-to-date satellite data, whether it's hyperspectral imaging or measuring other things from space. And that will mean that nations like Australia that are already on the leading edge of this new wave of putting space in the cloud will have a way forward. So we have some incredible space startups, companies such as Fleet Space, for instance, which are on the forefront of this. And we have a federal and several state governments quite heavily invested in making sure that this time Australia takes a lead here. Another thing that I think is going to work really well for us is when our current generation of fintech startups, our non-bank lending institutions, particularly non-bank lending startups, when they break out of the geography of Australia and start offering products and services outside of Australia. I think they're going to take the world by storm. Everybody's been very interested in what's been going on in Chinese fintech and in European fintech. Just wait until you see what comes out of Australia, and what I think we can do is really going to be a tremendous opportunity for the rest of the world. That's it from me.
Thanks. I seriously thought you're going to tell us a story about UFOs that Americans are noticing currently, but it's another story.
I think you'll see a few more seasons of bushfires in Australia. I think there might be very large floods from time to time, giant waves, and unfortunately, I think you'll see us going down to New Zealand in the rugby much more often.
That's a great weather report. Anyone else wants to jump in and put a forecast on for what they think might be sort of heading for Australia, or where we heading to?
Just a tiny comment on Alan's last point about fintechs going offshore. It'll be very, exciting to see that. We've got a strong industry there, but the open banking and GDPR, etc., has forced all of us to think about that kind of way of working with the open data. And I think it's not only freed up markets within markets, but it'll make it easier for us to enter them. And space, it's just such an exciting industry. I'm really proud of Australia's work in that space, pardon the pun, as well, because, when that changes, everything changes, spins up industries of its own.
And one of the things I like about the space industry in Australia is it is spread across the nation. Like you see things happening in Northern Territory or Queensland or South Australia, Victoria, and it is, almost like the different aspects of the supply chain, from satellites to the actual hardware to launch capability. Like we really are across the nation doing different aspects. And I'm also very interested in seeing what the capacity for engineers coming out of the likes of Atlassian and Canva and some of these big ones that, have gotten to that stage. They're mature, they're getting additional funding. And inevitably, you'll have engineers that are working in there that are entrepreneurial that say, I want to hop out and then do something else. And so I think we're going to see that renewal. But again, the question that keeps kind of burning in my mind is, what's the rubber band effect? Like there's just a natural progression of our ecosystem that's going to see nice, decent organic growth, both out and vertical. But we can play the game, which is this normal thing we're doing. We can change the rules by maybe having different programs, or how do we change the game in Australia? What would be that fundamental shift that we can do, which I honestly, after as much study as I have, I've studied enough to know I don't have the answer. So I need to keep asking the question rather than having an answer. But I'm very keen to hear kind of what we may come up with in the future that might shift the dial.
Just adding on from space as well, I think the other big opportunities, I mentioned energy before, but energy is a huge opportunity for Australia. Particularly around, we're doing a lot of things in solar and that, but there's a huge land mass, and the concept of green hydrogen and us actually supplying hydrogen to the Asia Pacific area. Like as Indonesia starts to really grow and become a more advanced society, India the same. Like a lot of the countries in the region, I think their energy usage is going to go up and as a developing and a developed country, and with that's going to become a lot of opportunities. And if we get our act together, when we play, do well and invest in the right way and build ecosystems here around some of those energy opportunities, look, we have a massive unfair advantage that we can take hold of. And the other one's probably food as well. We're already a massive food producer. With advances in technology, there's no reason why we can't keep being a massive food producer. I mean, Tasmania's got has got the cleanest air anywhere in the world. Premium products from Australia, have traditionally gone into markets like China. Milk being flown flying there. People are looking for clean products, and Australia has that badge. So I think there's a huge opportunity for our agricultural industry and for us to continue to through technology maintain our footing as a huge exporter in ag. And then I guess the interesting thing is going to be like what happens with the splinter net. We're seeing like the sort of Great Firewall of China being put up and things like that. And companies have traditionally been able to create technologies and sell those across the world into all markets. Now we're starting to see barriers come up, and like alliances formed. And so it's going to be interesting to see what happens, I think, in the next 5 years with regards to limitations on commerce and trade and digital goods moving across international borders. I think it's probably going to be a bit harder for us to do that. So that's going to have ramifications for a country like Australia. That's that if we're going to grow, like our best companies are ones that are selling overseas and not just selling to a domestic market. So what impact is the splinter net and the splintering of the internet going to have on those Australian firms and their ability to be able to sell globally?
Fantastic. We've got about 9 minutes left if you want to sort of spend a little bit more time talking. I have this one question, maybe last one to ask, and then you can just throw anything you like from now on. Is there anything that you've seen outside of Australia, US, Europe, anywhere that you think would work well in Australia, and something that we have in our ecosystem that you think world would love it, apart from fintechs?
One thing that I saw in Europe a few years ago, and it was interesting to read the sort of the Labor Party, one of the political parties here in Australia, their new announcement about investing in 2,000 university students and giving them opportunities in tech. Like I often think that the best place is the sort of money's in the money, and a couple of people have spoken about money's flowing into markets. And there was one program in Europe where the European Union effectively matched funded sophisticated investors who had proven themselves as angel investors, so that they basically match fund 50% of the funding that you're putting into an early stage venture, and then they'd pay, like with the returns, like you got to keep 20% of the 50% that they contributed, and they only took 30% back. I think systems like that encourage the flow. We copied the sort of EIS and SEIS early stage investment schemes that the UK had brought, and that's worked out well in Australia. I think anything that government initiatives that help with the flow of money, particularly for early stage startups, is going to be advantageous. I think there's always enough money if you've proven stuff out. Where Australia probably lacks the capital flowing into our ecosystem is really at that earliest stage. There's not as many angel investors here as there are in other markets, and there's not enough people putting in money on early stage and like the idea stage companies.
One of the things I think we're missing potentially a species in the ecosystem, as it were, within Australia, and that is something I see a lot in the US. Is just completely different socioeconomic structures, but the foundations. There's and you have things like the Kauffman Foundation over in the US with and these are a bit older numbers, but $2 billion in assets and 63 mil a year, just focused on entrepreneurship, and predominantly historically in Kansas City. And we've got the Minderoo Foundation here. We've got a few other foundations popping up, but a vehicle by which corporates can invest in economic development outcomes and impact at a place-based level. And so we don't really have that as far as ecosystem building capacity vehicles to do it apart from government. And so be interested to see some of those vehicles pop up, some mechanisms by which we can do that. And then also if we can focus that on, and just picking up on a point that Kay made earlier, as far as a bit more of awareness around social impact and social outcomes, and kind of investment beyond just the profit motive. I think that's a global shift. You have the SDGs and some awareness there. It would be great building on the wealth that we do have inherent to our country to be able to give back. And it's a bit idealistic. It's been my focus area around community resilience and impact from the ecosystem. But if I could have a dream state, I think that would be it.
Yeah, I was just going to add to that. I think if one thing that was really prominent last year was the advocacy that came out and the passion. And I think if there's something that we can hope for the future, it is the diversity in gender roles and our Indigenous people, and bringing, opening up, bringing those people to the table and making sure that it's they're hired and they have opportunities, and they're given that from an early stage. So bringing them into the mix, and I'm really keen to hear more about what Kate's doing with the Indigenous startups and around Australia and stuff to bring them up for the next 5 years and see what we can do.
I agree, Kay, and I think that the purpose-driven, inclusive, they're just going to get better results, and definitely more female founders as well. George, it doesn't exactly answer your question about what would work better here or what we could take, but there is too much friction around talent with ideas getting to sort of try or start their own. And I wouldn't necessarily advocate it with Goldman Sachs. They've got their incubator for staff, and Cisco do their spin outs, etc. But there's got to be a way, if you kind of look across talent that's sitting in places where they're not creating value, but they long to do so, a way to just give them that opportunity more, because we need to attract more talent into Australia, and with visas and immigration, etc. But we also need to unlock the talent that we have and find better mixes and constellations of mentors and advisors and people with ideas and tech skills to spin up. So really strong likelihood of success groups of people. So we have started to do that, and we will do it more. And, I hope that everyone will. And the other thing is, I guess we're talking a little bit to the rest of the world here. And I'd say that, as our whole team on the panel have said, we want to create, build and design things that the rest of the world want to use, and around inclusion and sustainability. And we are doing that, and we're going to do more of it. And then we just hope that everybody knows how receptive we are to their help and to their talent and to partnerships and investment as well. I hope that is what Australia is known for. So if you see one of our startups or scale-ups coming your way, how can you help? That'd be great. You're on mute, George.
I was hoping not to do that whole time, and I did in the end. Thank you so much. This comes to conclusion of the Ecosystems Down Under. This is Australia, and thank you all of you for watching this, and all of the panelists, and thank you, Ben, for allowing us to showcase this little island that we have here called Aussie Land. And we've got a lot of talent. We've got a lot of things happening. We want more talent to come here. As you can hear, we want more cash, and we have some stuff to export, and we're looking forward for a bright future. As soon as the borders reopen and the life starts flowing, we desperately need those borders reopen, and I think everybody does. But it needs to be done in a way that is safe. Again, thanks, Ben, for having me and this opportunity. It was a pleasure.
Thank you. Thank you so much, George, PostFest, and all the speakers involved in today's event. I personally enjoyed learning about, specific innovation expertise that you have over there. Like fintech was obviously one, but also space, energy, agriculture, and all the different ecosystems that were represented today from Melbourne, Brisbane, Sydney. So thank you so much for that. As some of the speakers told today, one of the good things that came out of this is that we're now closer than ever. And this session is running after 11 p.m. Local time is actually a proof of it. So again, thank you so much for joining us. But I can't wait to travel back to Melbourne in the near future and maybe discover other places like the one that we discussed today. You can watch the full session on YouTube and Facebook. It's already available. It's going to be available right now in case you missed part of it. And next week, we'll be traveling back to Europe with a session dedicated to Poland, created by InfoShare. So if not yet, go ahead and register on tour.sesamers.com. And if you want to learn about upcoming cool events, go ahead and subscribe to selected.sesamers.com. Thanks again, like every week, I'm really thankful to the team who makes this possible, and also to French Tech for supporting Sesamers on Tour. See you next week. Bye.
Thanks. Bye.
Au revoir.
See ya.
Thank you.